Greetings, Kerbonauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 22 of Project Odyssey, the second episode after we had our catastrophic anomaly. I promised you at the end of the last episode that we would be doing a few things like looking at the installation itself, looking at the mods list, and how I'm setting this up this time around. At the same time, in the background, we're going to be launching our second TDRS satellite. Okay, so the huge difference is, outside of the fact that this is now a totally different version of KSP, one of the huge differences is I was previously using a C# program to create my installation, and I have given that up. Instead, now I just copy the mods in by hand and I maintain them by hand. That way nothing can go wrong and screw up the game on me and make it so I need to start over yet again. I still have a config file. Previously I had a whole bunch of config files created by the program, but now I just have one config file that I edit by hand as well. That config is what is currently scrolling by on the right. If you want to get a copy of that, just go to the comments. There's a link to the forum page where I keep all of my images and everything for this, as well as a Dropbox link where you will be able to download that config file. Well, it's time to wait for the TDRS E2 to make it to its apoapsis. So why don't we use that time while we're waiting for it to start looking at all of the big mod changes for this install. Top of the list is toolbar, and these days, if you're going to have any mods at all, you have to have toolbar. Active texture management to reduce space. Then we have Aerojet Kerbodyne. That's what's giving me these parts here where I have my new Centaur stage, which is actually more like a Titan. So we have the upper tank, the lower tank, and the engine. We also get from them this little truss piece which goes there, put the tank on there, put the engine on there, and there's your lower stage. Also back here, this is where the RCS came from that I put on the side of it. And it's where I get my shroud that goes down on the bottom like so. Or if I want to have a larger version for a lower stage, then we can do the larger version of the decoupler. Finally, there is an escape tower that I will be using once I get around to actually making a Hydra. Let's do three at once this time. We have AIES Aerospace, Aligned Currency Indicator, and Animated Decouplers. AIES is where I get my satellite CPU core that I've been using. I'm also going to probably be using the fuel tank that I was doing a lot of in the first episodes of Project Odyssey. We have a small engine that I was using a lot before, so I copied that in as well. I have this new one that I'm going to use on the new Hydra. And finally, down here in the Science tab, I have a few scientific instruments that I'm probably going to put on something, as well as a couple of dishes. We have that one that you've seen a lot, and this is the one that I'm going to be using whenever I want communications at the really long range. For moon distance, though, like maybe if I'm in the Joule system and I want to talk to any moon within the Joule system, then I could have this 500 megameter dish. Aligned currency changes this thing down in the bottom right here, bottom left, and just lines up the numbers a little bit better, makes them similar because I guess in the original 242 they are totally different fonts. For animated decouplers, we're going to switch ahead now actually to SDHI, because if we look over here, you can see that there is this Hydra service module that I've got. I got that out of SDHI, and the reason for the animated decouplers is this right here is an actual animated decoupler, and this mod requires it for that thing to do its animation. Since we're here, SDHI is also where a lot of the Hydra parts come from. We have the Hydra heat shield. Actually, if I'm going to do the SDHI and show a Hydra, I need to switch ahead now to the near future spacecraft as well. So let's do near future spacecraft first. We'll take this stuff away, and you can see that that's where the Hydra capsule has been coming from this whole time. Also in here is a new RCS jet that's just kind of cool looking, 5 ways. And from here, I'm going to get some landing legs right there that will probably be used on the lander that goes to the moon this time. And this compartment that maybe I'll use in a space station, so I kept that as well. Okay, so that is the near future. We'll switch back to the SDHI over here where we had our compartment. For that, we need to put the heat shield on the bottom, and then the compartment goes on the side of that. Let's turn on AIES for just a moment, because that's where the engine I'm going to use is coming from. I'm going to put that on there, and I'm going to find a way to make that actually connect up with the other parts that come from STHI. We'll turn aerospace back off again so we can see what those parts are. There's this one, which currently isn't going to fit on there quite right. I need to scale that in order to make that look right. On the side of that will be, well, you've seen this before in the other episodes, the shroud. Again, I'm going to have to make that fit better. This goes on the top of there. Well, actually, technically, that goes on the top of there after we have on the docking node and parachute combo, but I don't like the way that looks right there, so I'm going to put that little nose extension on, although this time I think I'm going to get it from a different pack. Then I still have to make that fit better. That doesn't fit yet until I stretch it like I did in the other Odyssey Hydra. Next up, we have ASAT, Baja, and Blizzy. Now don't worry, I think what I'll do is I'll go down the left-hand side here, do that one column, and then we'll go and do a little bit of actual gameplaying, and then come back and do another column, so that I'm not overwhelming you with just mods, and did I happen to mention mods? ASAT is giving me just two things. We have the Alcor landing capsule that I was using for my moon lander in the last episode, or 2 episodes ago, and this is also where I'm getting the stack inline lights. So there they are, and we can turn those on nice and bright. They make the ground really bright, huh? Baja is what was providing me, like I said in the last video, this time it really was the last video, it's providing me with that new engine that I'm using on the satellites, the TDRS satellites right now. I also left in this side-mounted engine, which I think I might use at some point, but I don't really know exactly when I'll use it. This is most likely going to be the engine that I flip around and use as the engine for the lander that goes to the moon and to Duna. It opens up right in there and an engine comes out, and I'll probably have that on the side of the lander. I also installed, just because I thought it might be fun to use it at some point, the Critter Crawler, and everybody should play with the Critter Crawler at least once. There's also some retractable RCS jets in here, and this spotlight, which is really interesting. So when you hook that up with something, it'll flip up and it'll point wherever your mouse is out on the map. Actually, why don't we just go out and take a look at that real quick? So there you go, the light is now activated, and you can see that wherever I point my mouse, that's where the light shines. And then you can lock its position, because right now you have to click on it and say toggle light, and that turns it off. You can get an action group set up that will make the light stay pointed wherever it was at the moment that you hit that action group. And then there was Blizzy. That is where I'm getting this ambient light adjustment right up here. This is great for making Kerbal videos, because you can adjust the ambient light down to where it's totally dark and would suck to make a video, or way up high so that it actually looks like you're in daylight practically, even though it's nighttime. I just set it to a nice happy 50% medium point there, and that seems to make a fairly decent, bright enough that you can see it on YouTube, but dark enough that it still looks like it's nighttime. Boulder Company, BoxSat, Crew Manifest, and Crossfeed Enabler. Well, I hope everybody by this point knows that Boulder Company is where the clouds and the city lights come from. BoxSat I covered pretty much in the last video, pretty thoroughly actually, so I'm not going to go through that one again. We'll just take a quick look at it. As the name would imply, it's a satellite that looks like a box. Crew Manifest allows you to access on the launch pad, and even when you're docked with another ship, this dialog box that lets you do stuff like transfer crew around, get the crew roster, see who's available, move people in and out of any kind of thing that can contain Kerbals, as well as if you select transfer and you happen to have 2 different things connected here, you could click on one, click on the other, and there's buttons to move them back and forth so you don't have to go out on EVA and use airlocks to switch back and forth between all of your capsules. So the Crossfeed Enabler It's what makes it possible to do things like take these Centaur 2 mono tanks that I custom built, put those on the side of the bottom right here, put on some RCS jets, and then actually have them feed their monopropellant over to those engines. Normally, when you have a radially attached tank like that, it doesn't actually transfer its fuel properly. Instead, you need to get this fuel duct and put it on like this and run the duct over like that, which would then allow the fuel to pass through into the tank and then go into the RCS jets. Or worse yet, you would need to attach them directly to the RCS jets. It just looks stupid. But with that cross-feed enabler, the fuel goes straight from the tank all the way over just fine. Let's finish out this column and then go check on our TDRS E2. So next up we have Dark Side, Deadly Reentry, Distant Object, DM Magic Orbital Science, and Engine Thrust Controller version 2. Dark Side is a single part that I haven't actually finished configuring yet, but it is this side-mounted CPU. It's a probe core basically. I would have used this in the episode where I needed to bring up probes and stick them on the side of my landers after having forgot them. But I hadn't found this part then. I have now, and so I'd probably use this if I had to do that again. Everybody knows that Deadly Reentry is all about making more realistic reentries and heating and blowing stuff up, most importantly. Distant Object creates this dialogue that lets you control various things about what you can see from distances, from further away than normal. I really love this one because it lets you see from 750,000 meters away. You can see things like your space stations flying by, satellites in orbit, and planets that are really, really far away. Little light specks will fly overhead. They show up as nice bright dots just like if it were on a real planet. D-Magic is all about instruments. We have various scientific instruments that do all kinds of cool stuff. I haven't really set them up to actually function in this installation yet to do the kinds of things that I'm going to want to have them doing, but I have them ready to go for when I do get to that point. We can take a look at what some of them do. They have all these different things that pop out and do stuff. We got sensors and samplers, huge antenna collectors, things that look like they're antennas, drills to get core samples off of the surface, and a telescope. And last in that column was the engine thrust controller, which installs this module that lets you control things like your SRB thrust and create a curve for the amount of thrust that's coming out of it. I've talked about that one quite a few times in the past, and how my SRBs are programmed to throttle back when they go through max Q. This is how it does it. This mod is just a DLL, there are no parts associated with it. Currently I don't have SRBs on anything that I've built, so I haven't gone in and fixed that up to work for Ferrum Aerospace. Those are the default values that I showed. Those are what you would want to have in stock. I'm going to tweak those to make them work better with Ferrum. So right now our TDRS E2 is still really close to the TDRS E1, see there? And I don't want this to be right next to it, I want it to be practically on the other side of the planet from it. We have therefore not brought our orbit all the way up to be geosynchronous yet. Instead, while we open up here to make sure we're getting power to go around a couple times, we are going to loop around the planet. We have only raised our periapsis to 71 kilometers, getting it just out of the atmosphere. We're going to go around a couple times, and then we'll come back to this same position 2 orbits from now, where we can finally circularize and get a geosynchronous orbit well behind the first satellite. These dishes need to point to the moon, to Minmus, and now because we have TDRS E1 already launched, we can point one of them to TDRS E1, and then we can switch over to E1 and point one of its back here at E2. Now we need to wait a bit for the TDRS E2 to loop around the planet 2 times, coming back up to the geosynchronous orbit intercept, at which point it will match up with exactly where I want it to be in order to keep communications with both sides of the planet. This will give us time to look at one more column of mods. 3 at a time, we'll do Enhanced Navball, Environmental Visual Effects, and FASA. Enhanced Navball gives you additional icons on your navball, as well as ghostly indicators to show you which direction to go in order to get to the ones that you can't see. Known as Eve for EVE, the visual effects mod just makes your world look awesome. FASA provides things that go for Apollo, Gemini, and Mercury launches, like this inline instrument unit that I got from the Apollo project. I'm going to use that for my inline. I also grabbed a couple engines that I thought I might use, but so far I haven't actually come up with a way to use them. This is where I get all of the launch clamps from up here that you can see. And there's a few other parts that I'm not going to show just yet because I don't know exactly when and how I'm going to use them. Chances are I'm going to delete a few of them. Although I may keep this one because this looks pretty cool for some sort of a space station type module. Fellborn, Ferrum, and Firespitter. Fellborn is me, and so far I only have 3 parts. I scaled down that inline avionics unit to make a 2.5 meter version. And this is also where I have the solar panels. I have one type that attaches on its end, and I have another type of solar panel here that attaches on its side, which makes it really useful for doing things like getting it on the side of this solar panel, which was what allowed me to make those Tidris solar panels the way that I did. A nice 3x4 square meters. Ferrum Aerospace is of course installed for the improved aerodynamics and to give me realistic gravity turns. However, it also reduces the amount of delta V that you need in order to get into orbit, so I will be compensating for that with another mod that I will describe soon. And as for Firespitter, a full install will add a whole bunch of parts, but I only have it for the DLL because it's providing animation support. Next we have Fusebox, Hubs, and Hull Camera VDS. Fusebox adds to your toolbar this cool little button right here that when you click it, it pops up a battery and power drain usage indicator. There's a bunch of filters that let you set what you actually want to see, as well as a dark side calculator that tells you how long you're going to need power when you don't have solar input at all. Hubs enables other mods like Kerbin Town that adds the extra city down to the south, as well as KSC++ that puts in all these extra buildings all around your mission control center. And if you ask me, this is one of the most amazing mods ever. I love all of these extra buildings, and they have little cars that are moving around. They even have a train. Look at the bottom on the left right there. That's a train. Hull Camera normally comes with a whole bunch of different cameras and telescopes and things, but I've only kept 2 cameras so that if I ever want to do any kind of launch camera thing, I will do it with just these right here. Although I do reserve the right to add some of the cameras back in again. Now we have Interstellar, Kerbal ISP Difficulty Scaler, also known as KIDS or KIDS, and Kerbal Stock Launcher Overhaul. As for Interstellar, I don't have any parts to show you because the only thing I have installed right now is the DLL, and that's just so that I can activate waste heat because I really like realism type stuff. Kids gives you a button here that brings up the ISP difficulty scaler info, which you can see that I have created my own Project Odyssey version. What that means is that all the ISPs that I set, even though they're going to show a particular number in the VAB, when the game goes to play, it'll scale those down to 80% of that value, and that's to compensate for the fact that in stock, launchers look a lot larger than they do under Ferrum Aerospace. I have also, for realism purposes, set the thrust varies with ISP. And that's yet another reason why I need these scalers, because otherwise things would get even more out of control. And as for this slider down here, this is just a configuration type thing, nothing to worry about. Kerbal Stock Launcher Overhaul has a massive one whole part that I have put into the game from it. It is that payload decoupler that I thought looked a lot like a real payload decoupler with explosive bolts and tie downs and everything, and the little tapered look to it. So I wanted that one, and so I pulled that whole mod just to get that one part. Kerbal Tech, Kerb Cam, and Kerbinside. Kerbal Tech provides an orbit editor and tools to manipulate your game. Now, if you were doing this to something that's actually significant to the play of your game, like one of your actual ships, and leaving it that way, this is a total, utter cheat. You have never seen a cheat any more cheaty than this cheat. But if you're doing it to make movies, which is how I use it, then it's pretty much an essential tool because it lets you get your ships into the right places to get the exact shot you're looking for in your movies. Which of course is a great segue to now take a look at KerbCam. KerbCam lets you set up camera splines where you can center it on different craft, you can put camera keyframes here and there, then you tell it to play from one to the other, and that gives you movies, and that's how I make all of mine. Now, as for KerbInside, earlier I covered hubs, and that's basically the tool that lets you put in the new content, and then KerbInside is the new content. So that's where all of this stuff came from, is those two work together. And last in this column, we have Lockheed Martian and Cosmos. Currently, the only part I got out of Lockheed Martian that I've used is that cargo bay type thing that you saw me earlier putting onto my satellite. There are different sizes. The small one that I used, we have a slightly larger one, and then these are pretty much the same exact thing as 6S compartments, but I kind of like the look of them a little bit better. There's also a black one right here. So I'll probably be using those for something, I'm just not quite sure what yet. For Cosmos, I'm using this little bit as a liftoff antenna instead of the normal dipole antenna that comes with Remote Tech. I also have this Centaur 2 monopropellant tank that I can put a tank in there and fill with hydrazine if I want. There's a couple more over here that I haven't gotten to converting into my installation yet. They just were automatically added because this one was added. And that's all I have for Cosmos at the moment. I might add more parts from there though. 2 columns of mods down and 2 columns still to go. I'm looking at the time, we're at 20 minutes. If it takes me another 20 minutes to do 2 more columns, this is going to be another long video. Anyway, here we are looking at Tidris E2. We have reached our position after going around one more time that now we need to circularize that orbit at 1 day orbital period. So I'm using my monopropellant and hit the caps lock key to make sure I'm in fine control mode in order to go just a little teeny bit to get ourselves to that 1 day orbital period for geosynchronous orbit.
Status report, Chief. It's as I feared. Our cloak interfered with the anomaly, causing it to expand and destabilize. This is the captain. All stations, damage report. Captain, you need to come to the bridge. We have Odyssey Station on our screen. It seems to be in pieces. Scan for survivors. One faint life sign reading in a sealed module. Life support will fail in 10 minutes. Bring us closer and pick them up. Keep moving. Come on. Get in there. What is going on here? Who are you people? Just get in there. Where did you come from? Computer, activate field 1. We'll ask the questions here, Bill. You know who I am? You just sit tight until we figure out what we're going to do with you.
Yep, so basically this is what was happening when I was switching over to try and look at Odyssey Station in that particular install. So I decided rather than trying to fix it, since I was moving to 24.2, I would just write it into the storyline and maybe we'll make a new space station in this new install. But I'm not going to do that just yet. I think what I want to do first is get a little bit more of my communications network out there and going. So that means I'm going to send the 2 satellites that were going to be around the moon. Remember back in the last install, I had one on each side of the moon, angling some dishes down at the surface so that I could see from both sides. Well, I want to do the same thing again, but I don't want to do it the same way. I want to do it where I send both satellites in one launch. When the first satellite decouples, we're going to have that go in front of the moon, and when the second one decouples, we're going to end up having that one behind the moon, but we're going to do that by first going into a slower moving orbit, a higher orbit, and then we'll drop back down behind the moon once it passes by us. Those little puffs of smoke you're seeing are explosions. Those are little radial retro thrusters that are burning up because I'm using tweak scale and deadly reentry at the same time on those, and it's changing them and making them more susceptible to being destroyed by G-forces the smaller they get. So I'll have to figure out how to fix that. I'm no stranger to trying to fix little problems with this particular launch here though. Why don't we take a look at some of what happened on the way to where we are right now. First of all, you might be noticing that the engines are running before I actually lift off now. That's because the new KW engines don't start off at full power. You have to throttle them up first and then decouple them once they are up to a higher power. Whoa! And there we go, our first unplanned rapid disassembly of a rocket. This one is resulting from the fact that I have yet to set up all of the braking strengths and all of the crash tolerance values of all the parts and all the max heat values and everything like that. All that stuff isn't 100% set up yet. That's why in try number 2 here, it happens again. Watch on the left, look at that. There they go. They're going into the red and then poof, they're just disappearing. So I reverted that one to try and figure out what was going on with those little boosters. Speaking of boosters, we have a couple on the side of this one that's helping give it an initial thrust, but they're not exactly decoupling quite the way I want yet. And the latter part of the mission didn't exactly end the way I wanted the test to end either. Whoa, oh, upside down. And I didn't even mention in the very first test, the side thrusters were a little bit too big, and it lifted off with something like a 3.0 thrust to weight, and it was going so fast it was uncontrollable and burning up just on liftoff. It wasn't the only one burning up on liftoff. This one is going a little bit too shallow, and just attribute that to pilot error in the simulator. Yeah, it's just a simulator anyway. But we were going definitely a little too shallow, and things started getting quite warm, shall we say, until the entire thing was disintegrating piece by piece. It was glorious. Look at this one. Boom. Little bits flying off, colliding with each other until there's almost nothing left. In the next test, we took it up, tried the decouplers on those radial boosters, and it wasn't too bad. There's maybe a little bit still to work on there. Went all the way up and decoupled the upper stage, or lower stage, and releasing the upper stage to continue into its parking orbit. Went so far as to grab myself a nice little cinematic shot of the booster falling away, and then decided to revert and go for the real launch. And here we are now working our way into a parking orbit. This beautiful looking new Centaur 2 second stage is doing all the work at the moment. Operating on a mixture of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, just like a real life Centaur would. That was burn number 1, and it's finishing now as we get into that low orbit, where we then flip out and take a look at the map to see whether we're coming in at the right spot. And I've got myself this low orbit here where we're going to come around until this point, where we're then going to use this maneuver node to notice over on the left there we have the close approach vectors saying that I'm going to be arriving at the moon when it's a little bit still behind me. Now the sphere of influence distance on the moon is 2.5 million meters. So we're going to be trying for about 3.5 million meters to give us a nice 1 million buffer in between us and the moon so we don't get caught by its SOI and sucked in. And with the moon coming over the horizon, we are reaching the point where we need to begin our second Centaur burn. This is the final burn. This one is going to completely deplete whatever is left in the engines. It's not going to get us all the way there. The satellites are going to finish making the orbits around the moon. This is just going to get us a really close distance to it. So is it me, or is that one of the most amazingly beautiful sunrises that you've ever seen in KSP? It must be. All these mods updated now. They provide a really great immersive experience to make you think that you're actually launching these things. And I'm sure that right there didn't escape your attention. Inside the fairing, I had said there were 2 satellites, but did you know that they were stacked on top of each other? I'll show you in the VAB what that little trick was, but for now we're going to deploy this one, get the solar panels out, and complete the burn because we weren't quite at the moon yet. We'll activate that engine and then power up just a little bit, flip out to the map, and whoa, oh, we went too far. Turn off the engine, hit the RCS, and do backward thrust with the RCS. Select the target, see how we're doing. All right, now we're looking like we're coming in where I want it to be. So this launcher is the same one that I used on the Tidris, so we can skip a good portion of what's down here, except for I can point out that I'm still working on a few things like adding these boosters on the side here, and these have been added with tweak scale, which is this little thing that puts in a bar in here that you can click and change the size of these things. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said I had too big of a booster. I started off with the big ones like this, and those were too much, and then I tried them a little bit smaller, and then a little bit smaller still. Also different on the bottom is I had these retro thrusters that I have right here. Those are also put on with tweak scale. They normally are much bigger than that. Oh, they can go one more. So that's the normal size. Those come out of KW, but I put tweak scale on them so that they could go way down to be this big. However, when you put the tweak scale on there, like I mentioned before, what happens is it also changes some things that affect deadly re-entry's interest in taking them away from you. So when they get smaller like this, they also get less tolerant of deadly re-entry, and I need to figure out a way to fix that. So we had seen everything up through here already. We'll go all the way up. Although I can mention one thing I'm thinking about changing is coming up with a way of, let's take a look over here. For this round solar panel, I'm thinking of making it so that that can shrink down a little bit, and put one of those, probably with tweak scale as well, put one of those, or actually probably 4 of those, around the outside of this stage here so that it can get a little bit of sun's power, allowing me to go just about anywhere I want and still be able to use this. Such as, for example, if I want to use the monopropellant that's in here after I have already drained all of the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen out of it, I could actually go pretty far powering this avionics with the solar, and then use this hydrazine monopropellant, flip around and power the RCS jets in order to do deorbit burns up at apoapsis, which I didn't do on this launch because it ran out of power before it got up that far. So continuing up here, if we go in here, actually I need to show the inside of this with that off. So this is how they were stacked up on the inside. This is something that actually happens in real life as well, where 2 satellites get launched at the same time. For example, here you can see some real-life technicians loading up the first of 2 satellites, where 2 of them look like this stacked on each other ready for launch. Also earlier, I'm pretty sure I had said my second stage was a Titan, but then it occurred to me, wait, that's not true. I'm thinking of the Delta, and so there's the picture of what the Delta looks like. So back here you can see that these are stacked pretty much like they would be in real life, except I didn't have anything physically connecting them in KSP because that becomes a little bit cumbersome. However, I can show you how I did that little trick. Let's take the fairing off here and we can come down and take this bottom, that's just a KW fairing base. Here's the magic. I made this little piece down here. This is a custom part. If we take the one satellite off here, you can see that there was a node for attaching right there. That attachment node is coming from this piece down here that I made and added. Basically, it has, look at the bottom of it, you can see a regular attachment node there, regular attachment node there, but the one up at the top is a decoupler attachment node. And so the idea is you take your one payload decoupler here, you stick your second one when you want two payloads like that, and it makes this cool looking decoupler here. Now you have two decoupler nodes. You have one that was on the original decoupler piece, and you have one that's on my custom built decoupler piece. Each of them shows up over here in your stack with a way that you can decouple it, and then you just put them in the right order. This would be the first one because it's the top payload, and this would be the second one from the second payload. And then if you want the engines in the right place too, you can put that engine down there, and so now you decouple that and the engine up there activates, and this one and that. Moving our way through just one of the satellites, you can see that I used the BoxSat mod. I also added one new antenna from AIES. It has the exact same statistics as this one here. So I just wanted one that would not be on the side of it because I wanted to put the antenna over there and I didn't want this on the side of it. So instead I put this on the top because I thought it looked better. I added my new solar panels as well. These are coming out of near future solar. So yeah, the inside is a BoxSat internals. I've loaded it up with 3 of the liquid fuel tanks, 1 mono, a gyroscope, a battery, and a CPU, which now I have set the stats for that. The other parts of it are similar to that other satellite I already launched, where I have that engine in the RCS jets, and of course, what's on the side of it? More lights. This is our antenna that will do the communications with the one side of whatever happens to be around the moon, and that's that launcher. So it's probably pretty clear that I'm not going to be going through the other 2 columns of my mods in this one. I'm going to split it in half. We're going to do the 2 that we already did for this one, and then next time I'll cover 2 more columns of mods and a couple more launches of some of the stuff that gets us back to where we were in Project Odyssey before the cataclysmic anomaly that took us away from our latest dimension and sent us off into this 0.24.2 version of KSP. So until next time, I will see you later, Kerbonauts.